Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Sharper Edge podcast with Betty Parker. As usual, I am happy that you decided to stop by to engage in another conversation with me, or at least just to listen. And I hope you will engage in the conversation and offer a comment, a respectful comment about today's topic, which is all about being the language police. And I'm going to be talking about the language of DEI. Now, last week, if you had an opportunity to listen, I had a special guest in by the name of Deborah Washington. She is a recently retired DEI expert, where she worked in an academic medical center for nearly 40 years. So she comes with a wealth of knowledge. And she wanted to talk about the larger concept of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the comments she made was, we don't want to be the language police, at least not for the portion that she and I were talking about. We were there to bust myths about DEI. It's gotten a really bad rap. You've heard me say that before, mostly because I believe there are people who don't know enough about it. When ignorance is, and then I don't mean this in the most negative way, but when we are ignorant about certain things, it breeds fear. And when we don't know enough about it to be able to understand it to a point where it's no longer a threat to us, then we see it with great suspicion. And if we're not doing the work of finding out a little bit more about it, and we are ensconced in our own little cultural groups that continue to feed into our fear because they don't know either, then we have this kind of attitude that what we're facing is wrong, and it's a detriment to us, and it's a detriment to society. And when people from real high levels within our society tell us that something is wrong, and we're gullible enough to believe them rather than do our own research, then we will find many things to be a threat, including other people and what their wishes and wants are for their own lives. So DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, has gotten a really bad name because some people have latched onto it as a means of telling folks in our society that it's wrong, that by having it in place, it's taking something away from the dominant group. They are saying that it is unfair, when in actuality, not just the essence of DEI, but everything about DEI is about fairness. It's just interesting that the dominant group feels like they're the ones that are being treated unfairly. Well, how can you be the dominant group and not be treated fairly? You are the dominant group. You are the group who gets to have all the say. You are the group that gets to have all of the advantages. So when the minority groups, whoever they may be, come in and say, hey, we also want a piece of what you have. It is not a pie, as I mentioned to you all last week. There's enough to go around for everyone. But there is an active campaign against everyone giving access or getting access because of people's biases and prejudices. And so when that minority group steps up and says, hey, I think this is wrong, and we want to have access to the same things you do, we want to have the same types of opportunities that are made available to you, dominant group. And by the way, I know when people think about diversity, equity, inclusion, they immediately think about race. And I want to clarify that for you right now. It is not always about race. It is not about race only. When I speak of a dominant group, I'm talking about any group, any cultural group where there's one set of people that have all of the advantages. They're the largest in terms of number. They are they are the predominant group amongst all groups. So as a simple example, let's think about people with abilities versus those people who have some type of disability. So the dominant group has nothing to do in this instance with a person's race or gender or age or anything of that sort. It just so happens that the majority of the people in this group have what is considered to be normal physical abilities. Now, if I got a bunch of people who are in wheelchairs or have certain limbs missing, or who have some type of mental disability, or some kind of developmental delays or anything along that line, right? And they are smaller in number and smaller in terms of their makeup as part of a larger group, then they're the minority group. And if they come and say, hey, we are very capable of doing some of these jobs that are out here, but we get overlooked because somehow people think because we have a disability, we aren't qualified to do it. And they start rattling cages and making noise. You can't get upset with them and say you're wrong. And how dare we give you a job that could go to somebody who who are quote normal. They have the ability to do more than what you can do, right? So I want you to think about it like, if you were in that predicament, if you were the person who is very capable mentally to be able to do something, and the job doesn't require that you have any kind of physical attributes to do the job, but you get denied that because you are a person with a disability, that's flat out wrong. It's prejudicial, it's discriminatory. And those people have every right to come and protest being left out of opportunities. And that applies to any group of people of these protected classes that we speak about when it comes to DEI, based on race, based on gender, based on sexual orientation, based on age, based on abilities and disabilities, and all of the other types of cultural groups that exist in the world. And so I want you to just get out of your heads and out of your own way of being, and allowing your bias to get in the way, even in thinking about what diversity, equity, and inclusion are, because they are at their very core all about inclusion, which means to make sure everybody has a fair shot at being their very best because they have been qualified to do a certain work. They have the experience to do it. They may have the educational attainment necessary to do it. They have been credentialed in every way, and they are quite capable of doing the work. But because there are people in certain groups, especially dominant groups, who have biases, their biases say all kinds of prejudicial things. They'll say they're not qualified to do it when they have the qualifications. They'll say they're not able to do it when that's not even part of the conversation. They'll say they're too old for it, or they're too young for it, or whatever it is that stands in a person's way of saying yes to somebody who has the confidence and the qualifications to get something done, but they're not allowed to, because the person who is in the decision-making capacity allows their own personal biases to get away and say, no, you cannot do it. And they can't prove that you cannot do it. They just simply, by their own standards, their own personal beliefs, say you cannot accomplish a particular feat or task. And so that person's not given the opportunity. That is wrong. So DEI says, let's keep the playing field level. Let's make this fair. And let's open up the eyes of the people who are in decision-making capacities, who are in certain neighborhoods and certain communities, who are in certain work environments, who are wherever people exist, and they have a certain amount of influence and power that they can allow, in terms of helping other people who might not otherwise have access. So when these people are there and able to do those things, we're saying to them, then use your power, use your influence to make sure that you're opening the door for other people who want the same opportunities as you do. All right. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you feel like there's something wrong and there's some unfairness to creating space for people who are otherwise marginalized, then there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with systems that are in place that prevent people from being able to move forward. And those exist in a lot of places, a lot of financial institutions. They're in healthcare, they're in sports, they are in every sector of the working world. They are in communities, they're in civic groups. They're all over the place. There are all kinds of systems in place that prevent people from being their very best. And we have to look at those and dismantle them. And so when Deb and I spoke last week, that's what we were talking about, how this whole thing come about. What was the significance of DEI when she started? And she brought it down to just a survey that was done, or people who were very business minded and future oriented, and they had enough vision in their leadership to say, listen, the demographics of the world are changing. And as these demographics change, we have to change with them. So in the mid 80s, when this work was done to look at what the future would look like in terms of the workforce, it was going to look much more diverse. And for companies that were forward thinking, they were willing to say, okay, if things are going to change and we can't do anything about this change, then how do we accommodate the changes that are going to happen. What do we need to do in terms of leading a diverse workforce? What does this mean for us? And so they took the necessary steps to become a much more open and inclusive work environment. And they prepared themselves for the change that was to come. For those who did not, for those who thought too small, they had to struggle through such a change. And today people still struggle through those kinds of changes because they're not willing to accept that the world is not the way it used to be. And there are a lot of people who want to go backwards in terms of, and how do you go backwards and make forward progress? I don't understand it, because the two cannot coincide. One is going to keep you stagnant or lost and left back in days that we have moved far beyond. And then the other one's going to get you ready for the future and keep you pressing forward and help you to be more competitive and innovative and creative, because you're not relegating very qualified and bright minds to something that is cast aside. You're valuing those things and saying, I need these people to be upfront and center so that they can use what they've been given to help us overall as a company, as a neighborhood, as a family, as a state, as a nation, to be its very best. When we start, casting people aside and judging them just based on our own personal biases, then we're denying not just ourselves, but the entire nation, the best and the brightest. And so, when you do that, you fall behind. Your competitors who have been nipping at your heels will now overtake you, because they're not, living in that same limited world, or you just kind of relegate yourself to where they are. If you want to be stellar, you got to use everything that's at your disposal. If you want to be like everybody else because you're becoming so isolated and so center focused or self-centered, I want to say, and self-focused, and you leave out everybody else, then you will become stagnant. You won't become any better than your competitors. You'll be a lot like them, which means you fall into mediocrity if you think they're not as stellar as you are. So this is what we have to look at where we are today. And so, Deb talked about not, we were going to move away from the language police. And in our discussions, that was appropriate. And I think we had a great discussion. So I highly encourage you to go and look at last week's episode. But this week, I want to continue the conversation, but this time I want to be the language police, even if I'm the only person on the force, okay? Because I think language and words have power, and the meaning behind those words can likely change the way people think about certain things if they're open-minded enough. If there just needs to be clarification about what some of this verbiage is and context provided in terms of what examples might look like, I want to be able to provide that so that I am enlightening you, so that I can remove some of the ignorance that exists out there and simultaneously remove some of the fear and the threats that people inadvertently feel because they just don't understand, because those are all perceived threats. They're not real. The people I know and the work that I've done in these DEI spaces for years, there's nobody that's threatening anybody. All we're doing is saying, and for the companies who are forward thinking, all they're doing is saying, I'm looking within my organization and making sure I'm treating everybody fairly and equally. And those people who do so, the hard data says they tend to outperform their competitors. They do better than their peers. There are hard numbers, bottom line, results-oriented numbers, data to back up those claims. And there's lots of data to back up those claims. There are companies that do nothing but research. And in their research, it's been proven over and over again that when women lead, they do a fantastic job of that. Companies see certain percentages of increase when they are at the helm. When minorities lead, they see great results from a lot of those companies that aren't afraid to allow a person of color to sit in this chief executive officer seat. And so, it's about the bottom line a lot of times. It's about winning in terms of how you are pressing your company forward and your organization forward. And if you're letting your bias get in the way, you lose. I mean, just bottom line, you lose. And you go back and listen to the story that I told when I was denied an opportunity to buy a franchise because I was point blank told that because I was Black and a woman, I wouldn't make a good coach for this organization. They didn't base it on any of my skill levels. They didn't even base it on the assessment they gave me that said, hey, she's qualified to do this work. What they did was base it on their own personal bias, and they denied me that opportunity. Now I went on to, do great work with the next franchise. In fact, earning awards after that, working with 1 year with them as a rookie. I did outstanding work. And, the chairman is like, whoa, gives me an award and I get all this recognition for doing these things. But the company that said no, they were a startup. They needed me and people like me just to get them off, up and running. I don't even know if they still exist today. And probably not, because you can't build your business on prejudice. And so this, people like me can tell you lots of stories like this throughout their lives, the experiences that they've had. And so if you've not lived this, do not deny people their stories. Don't tell them that they're playing the victim role. I'm nobody's victim. In fact, I have been successful in my business for 19 years now. But it wasn't easy getting there. And a lot of the usual stuff that small business owners have to go through, because they are small businesses and it's a tough uphill climb against some of the bigger businesses, well, add an extra layer of bias and prejudice on top of it for people of color, people with disabilities, people who are in the LGBTQ plus community, people who are have certain abilities and disabilities, all of those things. When you have to add that extra layer and those other factors that say, here's another barrier you have to overcome. And those are so incredibly unnecessary. People get denied opportunities for investment into their companies because of that kind of bias and prejudice. They may not get funded through different financial institutions because of that bias. People can't buy homes because of prejudices and discrimination. People don't get promotions at work because of that. They're not allowed to live in certain neighborhoods because of biases. All kinds of bias and stereotypes get in the way of people, in terms of their being able to achieve and attain certain successes in life. And if you have not had to experience that, then you're the person who's part of the dominant group. And you have certain advantages and privileges that other people do not. And then if that's the case, rather than saying, well, I'm just going to step over these people and get to whatever it is I'm striving for, can you not just step back a little bit and say, well, hey, I made it in. Let me make sure I help somebody else along the way. That's the best thing to do. We are hardwired, I believe, to be interdependent. I think we are supposed to rely on one another. It shouldn't be a self-centered approach to life in any way. We all should be supporting one another, because what's that? Now I'm not going to get the term right, but rising waters lift all boats or something like that. So basically it means when I win, you win as well. And we all win if we're working together to make these successes happen. And the selfish person doesn't get that. So, and neither does the racist or misogynistic or whatever other kinds of, prejudicial terms that exist out there. They don't win either. All right. They just sit in their anger and their bitterness and their resentment. And, they don't necessarily achieve, when in actuality, if they removed all of that anger and hatred and bitterness, they would find that they would get, they would grow exponentially. They'd be, like a just shot out of a cannon in terms of reaching the goals and the purposes that they've had for themselves. So let's look at then, how do we add context around the language? Let's make sure that we're understanding enough about DEI that we aren't selling ourselves short and other people as well. Now, there are on my Instagram page, there are previous shorts and short reels that I have done that identified and defined words like what is diversity? What is equity? What is equity versus equality? What is inclusion? What does it mean to be woke? All of these things, these words that have gotten all of these negative DEI. What is a DEI hire? I don't even know what that is, right? It's a created term. And basically it says anybody who fits into any of these groups that I talked to you about, if they get hired, they aren't qualified because you can't possibly be a minority and have what it takes to do some of these other jobs or have some of these other advantages. That's basically what they're saying. Highly prejudicial language, right? So I'm here to talk a little bit about some other words. So I've already done those. You can go back and check them out. But there's some additional words and phrases that we need to be aware of, that there needs to be context placed around them, that need to be brought to the forefront, and that need to be challenged. And in challenging those, what I mean is once you understand what they mean, look at yourself. And do you perpetuate any of that behavior, or are you part of any cultural groups that do? Because there is definitely evidence that says you are highly influenced by the groups that you participate in. You may go into a group with one set of beliefs or a specific belief, but by being around a bunch of people who believe differently, they can influence your beliefs. And you can walk away changing how you see the world simply because you have been influenced by them. You know, it's very similar to when they talk about people being radicalized online. Now, not saying we are to that extreme, but that's basically what it means. Somebody who has a thought in their mind about or a certain belief that might even just be fledgling. They might not even know how they feel about it, totally can't really define it for themselves, not quite sure, but they start finding people who can cultivate that in them. And I'm not talking about in a positive way. There are people who, you know, will help in some ways um, to grow the prejudice and the racism that exists in people. They will co-sign on somebody's hatred and tell them it's okay. And then they show them a broader way to keep feeding the bear. They keep feeding the bear. They keep feeding the bear until it becomes this vicious grizzly. And it goes out and it attacks everything that looks like the thing they don't like. And so we have to figure out how to cut that off. And so if you're associating with people who don't mean well, especially if you've gone in just looking for socialization, but you end up finding this kind of warped thinking by a particular group, don't buy into that. If you came in with the right mindset, don't allow yourself to be gullible enough and allow people to come in and change your thinking for the worse. Okay, so I want to talk about cultural groups first. And cultural groups, we all belong to many, to several. So your cultural groups are any groups of people who share the same interests as you do. So I might have a cultural group that loves SEC football. I do. I might not even know those people, but we are from the South, especially the Southeast. We love football. We grew up on football. So we have that thing in common. Maybe I have a bunch of people who love leadership development in terms of its training. I have a whole training group. That's one of my cultural groups. We are all facilitators and instructional designers and deliverers of training related to leadership development. That's a cultural group. I'm a woman. So another cultural group I would belong to is anything that's associated with identifying the best parts of being a woman, womanhood, the greatest skills and the brightest minds, and all those things that apply specifically to women's issues, right? I'm a Black woman, so anything around African American culture would be important to me. I am from, like I said, the Deep South. Anything related to what happens in the South, our culture, our language, our food, our customs, all of those things. So you belong to as many different cultural groups as that I just described and more, because we are like-minded and they intersect a lot of times. So you have to just check your cultural groups. Now, are you traveling or moving outside of your cultural groups enough? You have to do that too, because we can get so used to being with one type of people and we buy into everything they say and do that we cut ourselves off from learning more about other groups. We have to walk in curiosity. If you want to grow socially, if you want to just grow culturally, if you want to know more, the best way to do that is to expose yourself to people and ideas that are different from what you are accustomed to. Read books, read articles, listen to podcasts, go visit, certain organizations that do things a little bit differently. They say the most segregated day in this country is Sunday, right? Because we are very separated according to denominations and race and all of that thing. Our beliefs on Sunday, we all kind of go wherever we go in terms of where we worship. And there are many who are non-believers, and that's okay too. They have what they do on a Sunday morning. But if you never venture outside of what only you believe, you'll never understand the beliefs of others. It does not mean you have to adopt other people's beliefs. Just like, going to, let's say if I were to go to some Hispanic heritage event, that exposes me to the culture of people who are Hispanic. If I only went to African American events and cultural activities, I would only know about my own culture, which I already know about. Okay, so why not come to understand and learn a little bit more about cultures that are different from mine? It helps me to learn more about them, to have an appreciation for them and their history and how things developed and the pride that they have. And that's okay. We need to be willing to allow people to be proud of where they come from and their heritage and their ancestors and all of the things that make them who they are. But nowadays, folks get upset if you want to celebrate your culture. Why do they need a holiday? Why do they need an event? Why do they have to call it the, blah, 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 if it has that cultural name in it, especially if it's a racial, event? So why does it have to be Mexican American, this, that, or the other thing? Or why does it have Asian Pacific Islander, this, that, or the other thing? Or why does the African Americans have to have Juneteenth as a holiday? They get upset. There are many people who get upset because they don't like people having something to call their own. They want everybody else to assimilate and be a part of whatever the dominant group has, and basically lose themselves and their own identity in this melting pot of what is, dominant culture. And that's not necessarily effective. And it certainly doesn't make all of the other groups who see themselves, it just erases people's existence and forces them to look and act like the other group, the dominant group. And that's wrong. Folks love where they come from and they love who they are. And this has been built into them and hardwired into them from birth. And so who are you as the dominant group to tell them they can't exist that way? It's arrogance is what it is. So people fight hard against that. And the dominant group tells them they're wrong for that. And they call them names and they trash them and they tell them that they're being playing the victim role, and they tell them they're being divisive because they want something to call their own. When in actuality, all they're saying is, can we exist in the way we know how to exist and be appreciated for our differences? Our differences are not divisive. They just need to be acknowledged and appreciated. That's it. And so whoever feels threatened by that, the issue doesn't lie with the other groups, the minority groups. The issue lies with you. Why are you trying to control what is important to these people? Why are you trying to force them to speak like you, to listen to the same music you listen to walk in the same ways you walk, to believe in the same religious beliefs that you have, to live in communities? Now that's where they'll separate. This is where people get separated, right? There are some people who do not want certain groups of people to live where they are. They don't care if you have your own little communities, just so long as you don't find your way into theirs, right? That kind of thing. So there's a certain divisiveness that occurs there. And this is what's so confusing for people who are minorities, because in some places you feel accepted, and in other places you are straight out, flat out rejected. And we know it because we feel, not just feel it, we experience it. We are told it to our faces. And people will still tell us we're playing the victim role. When you have never had to deal with prejudice that's that blatant, please do not tell somebody who is a minority that they're playing the victim role or they're playing the race card. If you've never had that experience yourself, who are you to deny those people their stories about what they know they've experienced. They're the ones who felt the pain. They're the ones who felt the rejection. They're the ones who were threatened in some way, verbally, physically, and otherwise. They're the ones who probably had family members who were literally killed because of somebody else's prejudice. You have not experienced that pain. So don't sit in your little protected seat and say, well, too bad for you, but you got to get over it because this isn't the way we see the world, and you're just being divisive, and you already have enough access to a lot of things, and y'all just want more and more and more. Which brings me to these terms, this verbiage, which has to finally get out of here. They, y'all, and you people. Now, I'm not talking about, when I say they and them, it's not about pronouns at all. This is about stereotyping certain groups of people. So when I see all of this rhetoric and chatter online on all these social media platforms, and I'll see people talk about other groups of people, and they'll say, that's how they are. They always do these things. They always want that. Y'all need to go back to blah, 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 right? And so they'll just separate. That's very divisive language. You people don't get it. So when you say that, you have divided and separated whoever they are from whoever your people are. That's a versus, us versus them kind of attitude. And when you do that, yeah, you've created a faction, you've created an enemy for yourself. And so because you don't receive them into your group, then you've automatically found ways to separate. And it causes what we see right now, a very a divided nation, where there's a lot of finger pointing and a lot of judgment and a lot of people making accusations about other people that are totally unfounded. They're based a lot of times out of stereotypes. So I want to give you a definition of stereotypes, because we do it very frequently. Many people do it very frequently. A stereotype is an oversimplified and widely held belief about a particular group of people, which can be based on characteristics like race, gender, occupation, or nationality. While stereotypes function as mental shortcuts to process information quickly, they are often inaccurate, exaggerated, and can be harmful because they lead to oversimplified or prejudiced judgments about individuals. That oversimplification, those generalizations that are often attributed to an entire group of people, and oftentimes they are wrong. They are likely negative. I just talked about cultural groups. Even though you may be a part of an entire cultural group, it doesn't mean that you're exactly like the people in your group. So if we talk about ageism that exists, if we have a group of people who are age 60, that's the only thing they have in common. No two 60-year-olds are exactly the same. If we have people that are related in, or all fall into the millennial generation, no two millennials are exactly the same. That generation is so large that the span of time for them, you got some younger millennialists and you have older millennialists. They're in their 40s, right? So whether that person is, you might have a 30-year-old and a 40-year-old, and their lives are totally different. They're in the same general group in terms of their age or the generation, but their experiences are so different, and where they are in their lives is so different. You can't generalize all of them and say all millennials are the same. So we have to deal with people on an individual basis. That oversimplification, those generalizations that occur. All Black people are not violent. Okay. All Southern people are not slow and barefoot and uneducated or poor, right? But this is what's believed about particular groups of people. And until we get past those overgeneralizations, we're going to misjudge each other, and we'll continue to misjudge each other in all different certain situations. And I want to go back to, if I'm a person of influence and power and I can make a decision about somebody's advancement in this life, but I believe a certain thing about them based on stereotypes and my own bias, then I stand in the way of that person's success. And that's what we have got to stop. That's why DEI is about fairness. Because when I do DEI training, I help the people in my class to recognize how they think. It's about self awareness. Why do you think the way that you do about this particular group? We identify some of the ugliness of what's going on. Does it get uncomfortable in there? You better believe it gets uncomfortable in there. And I tell my class, you may feel triggered in this. There are some things I might say you might not like. And that's why people don't want to have the conversations. But we have to have the conversations because otherwise we just remain in our ignorance and we never learn more. Fortunately, even though some people will come to my class, just a few people will come to the class here and again, here and there, reluctant, thinking they're going to get beat up on, especially if they're white, because they think, oh, here's one of those, especially a white male. They think, oh, here's a chance for everybody to come and beat up on the white male. But not all white males think the same. So after we've had our opportunity for icebreakers and discussion, then folks say, oh, this wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be. And they feel much more relaxed. And if we want each other to learn about each other better, then we can't come in with both guns blazing and ready to beat up on each other or to accuse each other or to target one another and judge us just based on whatever cultural groups we're a part of. Neither can we be shy to talk about some of the harder things like race and discrimination and all of the prejudices that stand in the way of people being successful. And if you feel triggered by some of the things, you have to ask yourself why. What are you trying to hold on to that you feel threatened by allowing somebody else, equal opportunities that you've been able to enjoy if you're part of a dominant group? So we have to do some of that soul searching and those deep dives. Okay, so stereotyping is a big no-no, but we do it on a regular basis. And one way I tell people to try to avoid doing that, and I'm very cognizant of it myself, you'll notice that most of the time, probably 98% of the time, even in this presentation I'm making to you today, I say some people or a lot of people or many people. I don't say everybody. I don't say all because that's stereotyping. But what is true about certain groups of people is some of the things that I said. Within those cultural groups, there are going to be some people who believe blah, 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 like I was talking about, right? Because that's true. But we do a terrible job of just throwing everybody into the same pit, and it's unfair. It's unfair. So that's what stereotyping is. Here's another term that I think has gotten a really bad connotation to it, and it needs to be lost. I think we could just lose this term altogether, and it's about being politically correct. Politically correct. That's often used in the wrong way too, because what it's saying is that, oh, I have to watch everything I say because people get offended. People are too sensitive these days. That's what I hear all the time. It's not about being too sensitive, although there are instances where people do take it a little bit far. I've witnessed some of that myself. And it's like, I don't think that's what that person meant. I'm assuming good intentions in this situation, or we all make mistakes at some point. That way, that's one time I can use an absolute, because we are all imperfect. We are all flawed, and we are all going to make mistakes. That is so true. However, one thing we need to do in terms of cutting each other a little bit of slack is to recognize that those people, whoever they are that you might see that have said or done something that you found off-putting or offensive, those people, because that's what we're going to say them, they, those people are just being human at the end of the day, and they are not inferior by any means. In fact, if you looked or thought about it long enough or hard enough for yourself, you fell in the same place that they did. You've likely stumbled on your language as well. You have probably made some poor decisions in terms of what you wanted to say. And so if it didn't come out okay, we have to be more apologetic, more thoughtful about and allowing ourselves and other people to make mistakes. We have to be more thoughtful about how we think about other people and what pedestal we're putting ourselves on, as if we do it right all the time. We don't cut people enough slack these days. We are very judgmental. We're very critical. We love to wag our finger, or point our finger at other people and wag our finger at people because they have said or done something wrong. To be politically correct only means that you're being respectful and appreciative of other people. There's nothing wrong with that. But the connotation is very, very negative. People talk down on being respectful of one another. And that's why we don't have a lot of respect these days. People aren't willing to extend grace to each other or to show an appreciation for somebody who might be different from them. They only believe that their particular cultural group is the right group, the superior group, the best group. And so, in placing themselves up at a higher level, they're demoting other people, and that's flat out wrong. Political correctness says, I hear what you're saying to the other side. I appreciate our differences. It doesn't mean I have to agree with everything that person's saying or accept everything about another group of people, but I can be tolerant because they have a right to exist. They have a right to exist in the way that they choose to, as long as it's not causing harm to themselves or other folks. And everything doesn't have to be my way. Everything doesn't have to be the way of my particular group. And the diversity that exists within our not just our nation, but on this planet. Globally, we are diverse. There's no one set of people that exist on this planet. So if we have to all share in this space, we got to learn to get along. And in getting along, we learn to show appreciation for the differences that exist. But if I say something wrong that might be off-putting or offensive to another group of people, I have to own that. And I have to say, oh, I am so sorry. I was not aware. Out of my own ignorance, I said that thing, but I didn't know it was something that was offensive to you. Please educate me on it. Tell me why. Explain it to me so I don't make a mistake like that again. That has nothing to do with political correctness. That has everything to do with being respectful. All right. And if it is about being politically correct, it's for the good, not a negative connotation that's pretty much dominated that term. Oh, she's too PC. They want to be so PC. Yeah, you should. Everybody should. And I'm not going to let anybody tell me I'm wrong for doing that just because I want to show respect to other people. And you shouldn't let them tell you that either. Don't let people make you feel guilty for doing the right thing. That's why we live in a world of so much chaos and turmoil right now, where people feel like the best thing to do is to either deflect from the truth or to shout you down or to curse at you or to call you names. And that's going to bring me up to the next part of this, the name calling. That's kind of a default, it seems, today, where people look for ways to denigrate another group of people by calling them savages, calling them animals, calling them monkeys, right? Talking about she's too sensitive because she's a woman. Women are very sensitive. They get all in their emotions. We hear terms like a toxic masculinity. There's a lot of new terms that have been developed here of late. And so, when we're judging people and defining them in different ways, and those labels tend to stick, and they're not always fair labels. So we have to just look at a different way to approach, because if you come out name calling, the first thing you're doing is putting up this wall and you're putting people on the defense. How much conversation do you think is going to happen there? Pretty much zero. What you will get is a big old argument. And for every name you call them, they're calling you one back. And where is that productive? How are you learning about anybody? How are you understanding how the other person feels? How are you able to show compassion and empathy for somebody else when you're too busy sitting in judgment of those, of that particular group, because you've said or done something that they found offensive, or they've done it to you, and your immediate response is to come out swinging. So name calling is never a good thing. And we have to be very thoughtful about how we respond to people when we don't agree with them. Another one that gets us in trouble is joke telling. So I'm still the language police here. And a lot of people say, oh, they're too sensitive. They just can't take a joke. Well, if it's funny, yeah, anybody can take a joke if it's really funny. A lot of times, though, we run into issues because we're telling jokes about areas of life that we don't have a lot of experience with. You'll find that comedians and the ones that are really funny and are really good tell a lot of self-deprecating jokes. So basically, they choose their own cultural groups. They choose themselves. They choose their own families. They make it very personal because they've experienced it. And they'll do all the stereotypical things, but it becomes funny for anybody who is kind of in that group because they're like, yeah, we can be that way sometimes, right? And we pick the lighter sides of us because we know what's meaningful and hard, and we know the parts that are painful, and we don't find joy in other people, in our own pain. Therefore, you shouldn't try to find joy in somebody else's pain. Leave the real comedic work to the professionals. They get paid to do that. It's all about timing, it's about location, it's about the right verbiage, it's about the cadence of it all. They work for years and years and years, and they bomb over and over and over again to get to that place that they are when they are stellar and people are actually paying money to come and hear them tell a joke. If nobody's paying money to come and hear you tell a joke, keep that for yourself, or keep it just for your groups who can appreciate something silly and funny. Now, I'm not trying to be a damper on humor. I love laughing at other people. There's some folks who are really quick with it, and that's fine. Tell those jokes, tell those funny kinds of stories, but stay away from anything that can be perceived as prejudicial. Stay away from people's cultures if necessary, if possible. And it's always possible. You choose to say what you want to say. So we just have to make sure that in saying some of the things we do, we don't use joke telling as an excuse. Because a lot of people would say something that's harmful, they get backlash from it, and they say, oh, you can't take a joke. No, first of all, it wasn't a joke to me. It was painful, and you suck as a comedian. How about that, right? Your joke fell flat. It wasn't funny. So stay away from some of that language that could get in the way of people, of people feeling or not feeling appreciated, are valued. And then finally, the last word that I want to share with you as we start wrapping this up is microaggression. And some of you have had microaggressions in your life. If you have not experienced a microaggression, it's probably because you're part of the dominant group and nobody's coming for you. So I don't know too many instances where people haven't experienced a microaggression. They may not know that they've experienced a microaggression, but I think all of us at some point in our lives are going to come across one. So what is it? What is a microaggression? Here's the official definition of that. They are subtle, often unintentional, verbal or nonverbal slights and insults that communicate bias against marginalized groups. They can be categorized as micro assaults, which are conscious slurs where people make a decision to say something to you that's a slur. Micro insults, which are these subtle put downs that can occur, and especially if it's associated with some characteristic about you. And micro invalidations, the denial of somebody's experience. Like I said, when people shut down your stories and they say you're just playing a victim role, when in actuality, you've had to go through some real hardships because people's prejudices got in the way. If they haven't experienced it themselves, they should never say your story has no value. Okay, so these microaggressions come about on a regular basis. And we don't even realize it sometimes that we're saying and doing these things that are slights towards other people. Even to tell somebody that what they experience doesn't have any real value, to invalidate that and say you're overreacting to it or you're overthinking it is a microaggression. So we have to just think, and some of the simple ones might be like, okay, somebody, and I've heard this one many times, a Black male gets into an elevator with a white woman and she immediately clutches her purse. Now, this man might have way more money in his bank account than she could ever think about making in her entire life. But she immediately responds because she sees a Black male and he is an immediate threat to her, even though she does not even know him. And this man might be a multimillionaire standing next to her. He might be the man she is going upstairs to meet for the job. He might be her potential boss, but her immediate reaction is one of insecurity and threat because of what he looks like, right? Or it could be just because, there is a person who walks into, because I spent so much time in the healthcare field, it could be just because a woman walks into with scrubs on, walks into a patient room, she's automatically assumed to be a nurse. When in actuality, she's the doctor. She has MD behind her name. But because being a doctor is mostly a very male-dominant type of industry, women tend to be overlooked or thought of as a nurse. Now, nurses, let me tell you, and depending on how long they've been in existence or on their job, some of them know more than residents who are going to medical school, because they have done that work and have so much experience. And if that medical student is smart enough, they will rely on that nurse. I would tap into that nurse and all of that experience and wisdom so quick as an up and coming physician. But oftentimes nurses are looked down upon as they're just a nurse. The doctor has the real medical knowledge, that kind of thing. All of those are microaggressions. So we have to think about, how we treat people and how we think about people and what we say to them. These are the things I talk about in my class, in my DEI class. So for anybody who thinks DEI is garbage, this is what you're missing out on. And I bet I've said something that's made you think at least a teeny bit, something that sparks something in you that says, I didn't really know that, or I didn't think about that. If I did, please drop it in the comment section. Ask questions in the comment section. Tell me your experiences. And I ask for respectful questions and comments. Okay. I don't care that you don't agree with me. That's fine with me. I only ask for respect. And that's because I'm going to automatically give it to other people. The only time I don't give a person respect is when you give me a reason not to respect you. But I believe every living human being deserves a modicum of respect. And I teach that as well in my classes. So I hope this was helpful to you. I hope this was something that was useful to you as well. And I hope it will engage you in further conversation. Next week, my next guest will finish up this three-parter that we're doing on DEI. She's a human resources professional, and we'll go further into this conversation about DEI in our hopes to hopefully bring people together more, not to use this concept as something that's divisive, but to change the rhetoric, to turn the ugliness on its head and to say, no, DEI is something that should be embraced by everyone. You've just been misled about it if you are rejecting it. And we want to cast it in the original light it was supposed to be in, because it doesn't have to be argumentative. It doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be painful. It's just an opportunity for us to see ourselves and others in the best way possible and to embrace each other as human beings. I ain't saying we got to have this big old kumbaya moment. I ain't saying you got to go run over there and say, hey, indigenous people, great. Tell me all about yourselves. Nothing like that. We don't have to get hokey and ridiculous about it. But if an opportunity presents itself and you can go out and be intentional about learning more about this society we live in, this world we live in, and how we should treat each other, I can tell you the universal language is love. The universal language is love. Treat everybody with kindness and compassion and love, and we will not go wrong. Wars will stop. People would not be hungry. Folks wouldn't be arguing with each other and stealing from each other and murdering each other. We would treat each other like human beings should be treated, with love and respect. But of course, now that is utopia, right? That's pie in the sky, but hey, we can always strive for it. So I want to thank you. If you've made it this far into the podcast, I want to thank you for listening. And I hope you'll get on this movement with me to bring greater awareness about ourselves and how we move and engage each other in the world, and hopefully affect some change. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.